A strange time for the crew. December 2017. COD World War II was the newest COD, and the group was on it, but not super fond of the game. And also, a new hit game was out that the group was loving. Fortnite. Fortnite was by all means a superior game, and would take most of the time, but COD, as per usual, was always a played game, and another sniping tournament was underway, as our last season was a crazy, chaotic season, and was supposed to be the last, but Will, along with many other players, were down for another one. So for the first time in 10 months, Will would set up the next tournament. For the most part, a similar group of players would compete from Season 6 through 8, but this time, a lot would change. Firstly, Jacob and Tahir, two of our best contestants, especially with Jacob, the two-time champion, would both be stepping away from tournaments, as both players didn't like the newest COD, but in return for that, a lot of old faces would return. Some very legendary. Sammy, a player who has made 2 finals appearances and has overall been a top player in his tournament days, would be making a return to sniping tournaments after taking a 3-season break. Next, Ron, not as good, in fact one of the lower rated snipers in his times in Season 1 and Season 4, would also be making a return. And lastly, Craig, a player who has only played all the way back in Season 1, would also be making a return. Craig was a decent player who would have his good and bad moments. Of course, many players from last season would be returning. Some of these players that we've known as developing snipers have started to become veterans now. Jason, the reigning champion, would be making his return in World War II, still on fire and looking like the favorite to win it all again. Chris C, now playing in his 7th straight tournament, and started off as a bad sniper and has turned into one of the best snipers, but still for him, he's trying to earn a championship after making many good runs, including 4 semifinals appearances and 1 finals appearance. With 4 straight semis appearances, would be a huge threat to win this tournament. Adrian, a player who no one would even bat an eye at until suddenly transforming his game last season, getting a crazy upset win versus Jacob, and has quickly become a top player, would be looking to do even better this tournament. Trayvon, a player who has seen some great seasons, and some really bad ones. Peter, another player entering a 7th straight tournament, and has had started to build up a trait for doing consistently well and making the quarters, but not going much further than that. And of course, our 3 legends, Frosty Steel, Dan, and Trev, with Dan making some small improvements, but still not looking very good. And of course, we would have a new player making their debut, a new friend in the friend group, Gabe. Gabe was a player who would talk a lot of trash, but he was a decent player who would make some threat to winning this tournament. Now, World War II at the time had one big issue: maps. Shipment wasn't out at the time, and most maps were huge, but overall, the group had agreed on London Docks to be the map, and this would be very beneficial to one player who really loved the map, Adrian. The games were set, and the games were underway, and our opener would be a very highly anticipated match with Jason, our reigning champion, going against Adrian. Get used to this. A semifinals rematch from last year, but while Jason and Adrian were both good players, both players would be playing Fortnite a lot, and neither one would be actively grinding COD. This would change for one player after the match, but for now, we were in for a good one. Adrian, starting the match off well, but Jason, keeping it moderately close, would go on a run, with Adrian getting a little cocky, but it was Jason who would close it out. Adrian would not take this loss well, trash-talking Jason, saying that he shouldn't have taken it easy on him, and Adrian would start to train. Our next match would see Peter going up against Craig. Two average players, but Peter would be the favorite going into this one, as he had a lot of tournament experience, and Craig, while still being a decent player, hasn't played in a tournament in 3 years. This game would prove to be one of Peter's best wins in a while, dominating the whole way through and eventually capping off a 20-13 victory to move him on to the next round. Next up, we would have a very lopsided match, with Chris C, one of the favorites to win it all, going up against Trev, one of the worst players, and Trev would be grinding Fortnite with his friend Adrian at the time a lot, while Chris C, on the other hand, would actually be playing World War II a lot, and in no secret, Chris C would dominate this, with Trev putting up a respectable 13 kills. Next, we finally got to see Sammy coming back, and we also finally got to see Gabe in his debut. Sammy being a decent favorite in this game, but would Sammy be able to maintain being a good player after his long break? Sammy, looking a little rusty to start off, but would start to get his groove back, winning the match 20-16 in a decently fought match. In another lopsided fight, we would have Trayvon versus Frosty, both players being seasoned vets at this point, and though Trayvon was a heavy favorite, Frosty Steel was capable of pulling off some upsets, so Trey would need to be careful. Trayvon getting the W, but Frosty Steel making this a good fight, but Trayvon would eventually pull through at the end for a 20-17 victory. Our last match of round 1, Nextron versus Dan. Arguably, Nextron used to be the worst player back in the day, and Dan potentially one of the worst players right now. Both players only having one career win. This would be a fun one. game was a misery to watch, as Nexron and Dan were both camping a lot and missing a lot, with Nexron for some reason opting to use iron sights. The game would be a close fight for a while, tied even 12-12, before Nexron would finally find a scope, switching over to an ACOG-like scope, and finally finding his form and getting 8 straight kills to beat Dan 20-12. Round 1 would be a fairly stale round, with mostly blowouts and a few decent games, and in typical Trev fashion, he would forfeit round 2 versus Gabe, eliminating Trev and sending Gabe to round 3. Round 2 would have more to offer. So far, it seems Jason is clearly the best player in the tournament, and he would have a decent match ahead of him in Trayvon. These two have played before in Season 5, where Trayvon eliminated Jason, winning 30-20, but Jason was a complete different breed from that point, and Jason would go on to dominate this match, looking on fire and like he was ready to repeat, beating Trayvon 20-12 and looking like the clear best favorite to win it all. However, on the other side of the coin, Adrian, a player who was hungry for a championship and coming off a close loss to Jason, would train and train and train, and he would be playing Frosty Steel in round 2. Adrian and Frosty have played twice before at this point, with Frosty winning in BO3 Season 6 20-19, and Adrian dominating last season, beating Frosty 20-11. Adrian, however, was a lot better than his BO3 days and was a big favorite going into this one, and Adrian would make a mark on this tournament, dominating this match, winning 20-8 and looking ready to make a loser's bracket run. Frosty Steel would sadly get eliminated in round 2 for the second straight season. Our next match would be a big one, Chris C versus Sammy. Funnily enough, Sammy in his last tournament, Season 5, would lose to Chris C in the quarterfinals, and this would be an epic rematch. Chris C being a small favorite in this one, but either way, this match should be good. Our first nail-biter of the tournament, and in a slight surprise, Sammy would take the win in a crazy game, being down 15-18 before crawling back in the game, and would camp for the last kill to move on to the winner's bracket of round 3, while Chris C would shockingly move on to the loser. Next, we would have Craig versus Dan, a very lopsided match. Craig coming off a bad loss, but it was to Peter, a decent player, while Dan, on the other hand, would lose terribly, but to Nexron. Craig, coming off a long break, would have the perfect game to bounce back versus the awful Dan. Oh my god. In the biggest upset since Frosty versus Chris C, Dan would not only get the win, but would actually hold a steady lead throughout the whole entire game, and this would make to be a very embarrassing loss for Craig, eliminating him from the tournament. Lastly, we had a meh matchup with Peter versus Nextron. Nextron showed to play decently, but Peter was a consistent player and was the favorite heading into this one. Even though these two would actually play before in Season 4, AEW, and was actually one of 2 career wins for Nextron, and the only win before beating Dan last round, but Peter was a much improved player from that point. And yet another plot twist, Nextron would best Peter yet again. Peter playing very poorly in this one and overall one of his more disappointing losses in his career, as he couldn't handle Nextron's camping ways, and Nextron would shockingly move on to round 3 to play Jason in the winner's bracket. As the round 3 matches were assorted, Peter would announce his forfeit versus his opponent Adrian, as in the words of Peter, he would say he had no chance of winning this and didn't even bother to attempt it, sending Adrian to the quarterfinals. Peter would really have no chance of winning a championship anytime soon. Our first match round 3 was a lopsided one, with Gabe versus Dan. Gabe being the clear favorite to win, though Dan did just come off a crazy upset and was looking to prove the people wrong. Would Dan be able to come through again? Absolutely not, as Gabe would send Dan back to reality, destroying Dan and beating him 20-10 to move Gabe on to the quarterfinals. Our next match would have a very played matchup and a solid rivalry between Chris C and Trayvon. Chris C, however, was 4-1 in their matches, but still, all their matches were close aside from the Season 5 match between the two. However, Chris C was still a solid favorite to win this one, and the last time they played, Chris C made an incredible 5-kill streak while being down 19-15 to win the game in the Season 8 quarterfinals. Would Chris C continue to dominate the rivalry? time, Trayvon would be the one making the comeback, looking shockingly good in this, and Chris C, a player who was projected as the second highest odds to win the tournament, would go down in round 3, not even making the playoffs, and Trayvon would move on to his 4th straight quarterfinals to play Gabe. Our last match of round 3, which somehow had next run in the winner's bracket still, would surely be his end here. Jason, still the favorite to win the tournament, and looked like little to no competition as this one, as Chris C was now eliminated, and Adrian was still making a loser's bracket fight. Jason would be a heavy favorite in this one, and would have no chance of losing this match. This upset couldn't have happened. This can't be real. But no, it is real. Jason, the reigning champion, had just lost to one of the worst snipers of all time, who admittedly was playing very well this season and probably isn't a bad player. Jason, having a good lead, being up 12-6 at one point, would somehow let it slip away, and now, in a crazy twist, send next round to the semifinals, and Jason would move on to play Adrian yet again in the quarterfinals. The quarterfinals, Jason versus Adrian, and Trayvon versus Gabe. But wait, Gabe would forfeit suddenly, saying he deleted the game and he didn't like it anymore. A very odd way to go out of the tournament, but this would move Trayvon on to the semifinals to play Sammy. Jason versus Adrian yet again. Jason getting the better of Adrian in round 1, but the two players have taken completely different paths since then. This was becoming the best rivalry around, but Jason, throughout this whole tournament, has had little to no motivation to play, claiming he didn't really care after earning his championship last season and earning his goal. Adrian, on the other hand, has slowly become a top-notch player, but Jason, still the favorite and the reigning champion, would be looking to win this match. Adrian, not playing around this time, would look incredibly good and would finally get his revenge, eliminating Jason and moving on Adrian to play next round in the semifinals. Semifinals, a very unexpected semifinals, as Adrian and even Sammy were expected to do well. Trayvon, making his second semifinals appearance, and Nextron, not even expected to make the playoffs, would come out of nowhere to make it here. First up, we had Sammy versus Trayvon. Sammy being a small favorite to win this, and Trayvon would need to win twice to advance in the series. Trayvon has looked very solid in this tournament aside from his brutal round 2 loss to Jason, and Sammy also looking like a solid player. This was bound to be an even match, but who would come through? Trayvon, in crazy fashion, would win, actually destroying Sammy at first, going up 7-0 to start the game, and even being up 17-8, before Sammy would make an incredible comeback effort, and even getting it as close as 19-16, before Trayvon would finish the job, setting up a winner-go-home game for the two players. Sammy getting a crazy win in an amazing nail-biting game. This game played almost the opposite of Game 1. Sammy would actually get a huge lead in this game, and eventually be up 17-11 before Trayvon would make an incredible comeback. Trayvon, even down 17-19, would not go down without a fight, and got it to 19-19, but would peak a little too far, and Sammy would move on to his third finals appearance. The first semifinals game was a banger, and now we had Next Round versus Adrian. And this was a very odd semifinals, because though Next Round was undefeated going into this, he was actually the underdog in this one, as Adrian looked very convincing, while Next Round, while looking good, has been an extraordinary camper and has barely squeaked through, but Next Round, still undefeated, coming off a crazy upset win versus Jason, was looking to advance to his first ever finals appearance out of thin air, after not even making a playoff appearance before this. And unfortunately for Adrian, of all the semifinals games in the double elimination bracket, the player that has had one loss coming into semifinals, player that has to win twice basically, has only fully won the series one time, making a record of 1-8 for players coming in with one loss. But Adrian was destined to change history. Wow, Adrian would completely and utterly destroy Nextron, 20-5, taunting him and proving that his camping ways won't get the job done here. Adrian, at this point, was looking very good and ready to play Game 2 versus Nextron to send him to his first ever finals appearance. But, Nextron would actually forfeit Game 2 after getting completely embarrassed in Game 1. And with that, Adrian would advance to play Sammy in the finals. The finals, Sammy versus another Will relative. Oh boy. Sammy, so far, has looked very solid in this tournament, showing that he is a very clutch player, winning two 20-19 matches in this tournament. But Adrian has looked so dominant in this tournament that people would compare him to Will and Christian, and some even said that World War II Adrian would beat Will. Yeah, right. But Sammy having a lot of finals experience, appearing in back-to-back AW finals, but sadly getting outclassed by Will in both, and Adrian in his first finals appearance. This should be good. Adrian, in eerily similar fashion to Will's finals wins versus Sammy, would dominate this one from start to finish, taunting and looking really good like a top player for some time, winning the match 30-16 and making Sammy 0-3 in the finals. And another sad loss for him yet again. Adrian would earn his first championship and would mark himself as a top player for a lot of time to come. The best match of the tournament goes to Sammy versus Trayvon, semifinals game 2. There was a few decent matches in this tournament that could have been here. The other one being Sammy versus Chris C from round 2, which was also 28-19. Maybe even Dan versus Craig you could put up here. But I have to say this one because it was for the finals. It was a winner-go-home game in the semifinals, and both old-school snipers would play really well in this game, and Sammy having a huge lead and Trayvon almost coming back in this one. This was definitely one of the most, the biggest highlights of this entire tournament, honestly. And there really wasn't too much other competitors, so for this reason I kind of have to put this one as the best match. And this is honestly one of the most underrated matches of all time, just because it was in a tournament that wasn't really talked about as much. Sorry, by the way, guys, I'm a little sick here, so just bear with me here. The best underdog story of the tournament goes to Nexron. Now, really, there was not many other options for this. I guess I could have thrown Dan in because he got a win. But realistically, I kind of have to give this to Nexron because he wasn't really predicted to even make the playoffs in this tournament. And he did make the semifinals after, I mean, he did get embarrassed in the semifinals, but even with that being said, he kind of has to win this award, starting off the tournament 3-0, and getting 2 really good underdog wins. One against Peter, which was a nice underdog win, and one especially a really good underdog win versus Jason, making a really good comeback in that game. Now, this wasn't one of the more overly impressive underdog stories, but, I mean, it still was impressive, don't get me wrong, because he did, like I said, get some nice underdog wins. But, Nexron didn't play overly well in any of those games. He would just play really strategical, like camping a lot, and the other snipers just weren't really motivated in this tournament. Like, Peter didn't really care. A lot of players didn't really like this game. Jason had really no motivation at all or care for this tournament whatsoever, because after winning that last tournament, Jason's motivation kind of just went down the drain, and his care just got way, way less for these sniping tournaments. Well, which was really sad, honestly, but, I mean, that's just kind of how it is for some players, so I guess for that reason, I mean, Nexron still does have to win this, and like I said, I'm not taking anything away from Nexron. It was really impressive what he did in this tournament, making a semifinals after just coming out of nowhere, so for that reason, he kind of has to win this award. Most loved sniper of the tournament, I mean, come on, this has got to go to Dan, especially this season over last season. Last season, he got a win, but it was versus Trev. However, this season, he got a win versus Craig, and it was almost a borderline dominant win, which is crazy. Now, in terms of all-time great upsets, we have a few, but I think the 2 that are the most crazy of all time, and we'll talk about some more, there is some more coming up later on, don't get me wrong, but especially, you know, we're not gonna talk about that, but the 2 that come to mind, the 2 probably biggest upsets of all time, was Frosty Steel versus Chris C, and Dan versus Craig. Now, I would say Frosty versus Chris C is a bigger upset than Dan versus Craig, because Chris C was like an actual top sniper at the time, and Craig was like a decent sniper, but nowhere even near a top sniper. And Frosty Steel was definitely one of the lower ranked snipers, barely getting wins, and barely even beating Dan in that season, the same season he beat Chris C. So that was definitely a crazier upset in my opinion, but this one was a pretty crazy upset, because Dan was a really, really bad sniper before this, and Craig was like a decent enough sniper that would hold his own and do really well. But I think Craig, after not being in tournaments for so long, was kind of nervous going into these tournaments, and really just got him a bad loss against Dan somehow. And like I said, Dan would borderline dominate this match, and overall won it 20-16. I mean, for that reason alone, he was definitely the most loved sniper. And I mean, like I said before, Dan, just a funny guy, always the most loved sniper. Him and Frosty were really loved in these tournaments, so yeah, Dan's gonna easily win this award. Most hated sniper of the tournament, and this is gonna start to be a trend. This is going to go to Adrian. Now, Tahir stepped out of tournaments, and he would be the classic guy winning these awards. Adrian filled that role and really well, maybe even better, debatably. The reason this is Adrian is because he was one of the most cocky snipers ever of all time, and he would BM, which is just bad manners, by the way, but he would BM a lot in every game, teabagging, shooting bodies, being super cocky overall. And he would trash talk a lot in the messages. I mean, there was times where he had showed good sportsmanship, saying GG and stuff, but especially with Jason, he would trash talk and not really like Jason whatsoever, especially in these few tournaments. So Yeah, the Adrian is gonna be a common theme for this award for sure. For kind of the same reasons as Tahir was back in the day. Kind of a sore loser when he would lose, and Adrian, of course, when he'd win, he would be so overly top cocky. And yeah, for that reason, Adrian's definitely gonna win this award. The most improved player of the tournament, and this might be a little plot twist, but this is actually gonna go to Adrian. Now, hear me out on this one. I could have given this to Nexron, and that honestly might have been a fair thing to do, but I think I kind of want to give this to Adrian, because last season, yes, he was a really good player. He made a semifinals appearance and looked pretty good overall last season, but this season, he went from a good player who can make a semifinals appearance and compete to one of the top players of all time in straight up this one season, having one of the most dominant seasons of all time. In my opinion, probably second or third. I would say Christian in Season 5 had the most dominant season, but I would say Adrian might even be shortly behind that. But Adrian, like I said, he went from a good player to like an actual great player. People even compared him to me and Christian, which honestly is fair, but I don't know if he would have been me or Christian. But anyways, that's really up for debate. But yeah, Adrian is definitely the most improved player of the tournament for that reason. Nexron, yes, he did improve from his days where he played really bad, but like I said, Nexron wasn't like super flashy in his wins at all, and he would kind of camp it out like pretty heavily in a lot of those, and against Adrian that just didn't work out. A lot of the times these like snipers that aren't as good, and no offense by the way, would camp and play really strategical, which was really smart by the way, and I personally don't mind it. I actually like when people do that because it makes it a lot more interesting, and it shows that they're trying, and it's just a really smart thing to do. But a lot of times I notice once they play a sniper that is really good, it just doesn't matter. An example I would give from way back then is Watch Trout in Season 2. He would camp pretty hard, but he played Fation, and his streak ended. And we saw this kind of again in this season. Nexron would camp a lot, winning a lot of games, winning a lot of upsets, but when he played a sniper that was really great, it just didn't even matter, and not even close to mattering, as Adrian just destroyed him completely in that semifinals. And for this reason, I would say Adrian is the most improved player of the tournament. Just after losing to Jason in round 1, would just completely dominate every single game, and would go on to be, I think, probably, yeah, like I said, probably top 2 most dominant seasons of all time. I think KD-wise, Adrian, this is actually the highest KD ever in a tournament, ever in a single tournament. I think Adrian had like a 2.45 KD. So, yeah, like I said, Adrian is the most improved player of the tournament. The biggest disappointment of the tournament, and there's 2 players that could have won this award, but I really just have to give this to Jason. And not only, I mean, Jason, yes, he made a quarterfinals, and the other player I could have given this to, honestly, maybe even 3, but I think Jason has to win this award. The other one, of course, Chris C, I could have given him this award, because he did not even make the playoffs, and he was one of the biggest favorites to win this tournament, actually a pretty good player in World War II, but to be fair to Chris C, his schedule was really hard, having to play Sammy and Trayvon, 2 semifinalists, and losing by 1 point to Sammy in a really close game. So, while Chris C's schedule was hard, Jason, on the other hand, lost to Nexron in round 3. And yes, that reason was really hard. Also, the other player I could have potentially given this to was Peter, because Peter was like a solid player in these tournaments, but Peter forfeiting, not even trying against Adrian, and losing once again to Nexron again, like, those reasons were just not good. But the thing about Jason, who, by the way, we talked very highly about him in these past tournaments, and he is one of the best snipers, of course. He's a great player, and has had some great moments, but we're gonna start to see Jason kind of have some collapses later on in his career, and definitely be disappointing overall. I mean, we'll see in these next few tournaments what happens with Jason, but as for this tournament, yes, Jason very disappointing. Starting off on fire in those first 2 matches, but Jason's care for these tournaments has just completely plummeted down, and yeah, for that reason, Jason's definitely the most disappointing, winning the finals and then losing to Nexron. I don't even really care about the Adrian loss in the quarterfinals, because like I said, Adrian was on a whole new level in this tournament, and I mean, Jason probably, even if he was trying, would have lost anyways, but the Nexron loss alone warrants this award for Jason, because yes, Jason wasn't trying, but I'm gonna be honest, like, in not trying and losing to Nexron, there's no excuse for that, because Jason, even without trying, is just a lot better of a player than Nexron. So yeah, for that, I mean, I kind of have to unfortunately give this to Jason. On a competitive scale, I'm gonna rank this tournament a 5 out of 10. I'm gonna go over this one. This is another kind of weird one to do, and the reason why for that is because there were a lot of pretty solid snipers in this tournament, and overall this tournament ranked 8th in terms of average win percentage, which is a little on the lower end, but not not like super low in terms of competitive. There's definitely way lower in terms of competitive scale. But the thing with this tournament is a lot of players weren't really motivated and didn't really like this game overall. Hence why like people like Gabe even forfeit in the the quarterfinals, and people like Jason, Peter really had no motivation. Only a few snipers had some motivation to do good in this tournament. Really, just Sammy, Trayvon, Adrian, and Nexron were the main people. And Chris C, of course, but like I said, Chris C had a tough schedule early on and just didn't do well overall. But he did care for this tournament. It was really unlucky for him. But yeah, 5 out of 10, because like I said, the really good snipers. We had Jason, we had Adrian, we had Peter, we had, of course, Sammy and Trayvon, 2 solid players. So we had some decent players in this tournament, but a lot of people didn't have much motivation in this tournament because they didn't like the game, which is fair enough because this is the old World War II, not the 6 months when they started doing good patches and making the game good overall. If the map was Shipment and we'd started this tournament a little later on, maybe it would have been better. Because, like I said, Shipment is just a better map than London Docks, of course. So, yeah, for that reason, 5 out of 10 on the competitive scale. On a fun scale, I want to rank this a 4 out of 10. Hosting it wasn't really that fun. Seeing the matches wasn't really super fun. Because kind of ties in to the competitive scale. A lot of people were just not motivated, didn't like the game. I mean, Prime Fortnite was out at the time, and Prime Fortnite was one of the best games of all time. Debatably the best multiplayer game of all time. Which is fine, because me personally, I played Fortnite a lot, especially with Jason. Me and Jason used to run Fortnite a lot. Good times. Even Dan, like, the whole group, we played Fortnite way more. And at the time, 2K18 and this game were out, and both games were kind of duds. So, yeah, most of our time was spent on Fortnite, so fun scale for this tournament, not very high. And yes, on an overall scale, this is going to be a 3 out of 10, which makes this the 11th best tournament and the 2nd worst tournament. Now, on paper, this tournament is probably better than Season 2 and Season 7, but the reason why this tournament is really lackluster and bad is, well, I'm going to say it again, a lot of people didn't have motivation in this tournament. A lot of people just didn't really care for this tournament, and overall, the playoffs was kind of a dud. There wasn't many good matches. Sammy versus Trayvon and Dan versus Craig are the only 2 saving graces of this tournament, and the only 2 reasons why this tournament is, like, kind of like decent. It's not the worst tournament. It's definitely better than Season 4. There's no tournament that's going to be worse than that. But honestly, you could make the argument that this tournament is better than Season 2 and Season 7, which is totally fine. I could understand that, because there was, like, matches-wise, the matches were a lot better. But yeah, this tournament overall wasn't good for that reason in terms of motivations, and the playoffs wasn't good. And also, we just came off of a really great season, the best season of all time with Season 8, so coming off the best season and going all the way down to the 11th best, which is 2nd worst, not very good. But yeah, I'm going to rank this a 3 out of 10, and sadly, this is going to be the 2nd worst tournament. And the best moment / personal favorite moment, there is only one moment for this. I don't even care what anyone says. This is the Dan upset versus Craig. Yes, Sammy versus Trayvon was a great match. Great match, though, but the moment of Dan beating Craig, just that moment alone, is really the only moment of this tournament that's still talked about. Like, usually every tournament has one moment that's talked about. Like, Season 1, of course, it's the, I would say it's the classic Frosty Steel War Machine line. Season 2, it was me versus Fation. Season 3 had a lot of different things. The Italian Showdown, me versus Fation, Simon versus Sammy, Sammy's underdog story. Season 4, I would probably say, wasn't too many moments, but probably the me versus Fation trilogy. Season 5, probably the me versus Christian finals. That's the most talked about thing from that season. Season 6, a lot of things once again in that season. We had the Chris R versus Jacob thing. We had the Chris C versus Trayvon rivalry, the Jason versus Chris C quarterfinals. Season 7, Frosty upset versus Chris C. Season 8, so much different things. Season 9, if it's gonna be Dan versus Craig. That was the only moment of this tournament that's really talked about much. And that's like the most known moment from this tournament. And definitely the best moment. And my favorite moment, of course, too. Because it was a crazy upset. And oh boy, I will see you guys for next season. Please stay tuned for next season. We're going to be, I think in terms of bad tournaments, we got most of them out of the way. In terms of bad tournaments, there is no more left. We have pretty good tournaments. Well, okay, besides Season 12, but like I said, that's unspoken. So yeah, I'll see you guys next season.